Cora White for Life in Charlotte. I'm with Ambassador Linda Tarr-Whelan at the Westin Uptown Hotel, where you've just spoke for a World Affairs Council luncheon. Ambassador, welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Well, in looking at your history, it's quite amazing, starting with the Carter administration and then the Clinton administration with an official post as an ambassador. Tell me what that process has been like for you.
Well, I started out as a nurse, so I started out in a little unusual place for someone who would go to the White House or someone who would become an ambassador. And my route to those positions has really been being involved in these issues because I cared a lot about them. And because I was involved, people opened doors for me to do different kinds of things. So the Carter White House, I was the Deputy Assistant for Women's Concerns. And what was the most fascinating to me in that particular position was how much influence one person can have. We, for the very first time, talked about capital for women's small businesses. President Clinton appointed me as an ambassador, and then I had to go up for confirmation before the Senate. And the job of ambassador is quite different than the job I had in the White House, because I spent a lot of my time negotiating, a lot of my time working with women's grassroots organizations from all over the world, and a good bit of my time trying to work inside the State Department to move old strategies and old ways of thinking. And so it was a fabulous experience. The portfolio was called the women's portfolio. And I think it was unusual in the Clinton administration. I certainly hope that even though we have a woman Secretary of State and we have a woman heading our mission to the United Nations now, that they do in fact have an ambassador position that does exactly this. Because you can go to other countries and find out what's going on to start with. As I spoke today, we tend in America to think we're the top of the heap on women's equality. And in fact, there's much to learn from other countries. And then it's also, you're able to bring back the problems and the stories from women who really don't have any of the advantages that we do in this country, but are fighting hard to get a way up, to have their talents recognized. So both ways it works. You learn a lot and you're able to bring the stories back home.
What would you say are the greatest challenges now that women are confronted with, not only nationally but globally?
I think globally the issues are different in some ways. AIDS is a terrific problem globally, particularly in Africa and Asia, where women are getting AIDS, or are being diagnosed with HIV/AIDS far more than men are. So that's a huge problem. Infant mortality is a big issue in those areas. Sex trafficking, women who are brought from their home country, usually with, things are going to be great. You can be a waitress in our restaurant to find out they're working in a brothel. So sex trafficking is a big issue. When you move into other parts of the world, I think this question that is really much on my mind about women's representation in decision making, making sure we have enough women's voices at the table to change our societies in ways that women want to see that happen, is really a big issue that is just beginning to be thought about and heard about here.
At lunch today, you spoke about health care for women in other parts of the world and where we have a slight deficit in the United States. Would you speak to that?
Yes, infant mortality is a very big issue around the world, but it's also a great big issue in the United States with regard to African American communities and Hispanic communities. Infant and mother's mortality, both of them, are as high in those communities as in most developing nations around the world. Because you have to, I started out as a nurse and I taught maternity nursing, so you've asked me a really good question. But you have to get early care. You have to, have the diet. You have to be able to pick up what the problems are before you go into labor. And that's what's missing for many women here, where they just haven't had access to health care or good health care.
What about maternity leave?
Maternity leave. We're one of only 2 countries in the world that don't pay for the time women have to take off when they have a child. Now that's pretty astounding. In the United States, we have 12 weeks of unpaid family and medical leave. And either the husband or the wife could take off, or you could take time to take care of an elder in your family or that family emergency of that type. But what other countries have is they have given a certain amount of money, sometimes up to a year or 2 years, for a woman when she has a baby, so that her job is preserved, but there's an income there. And I was telling the story of a woman from Portugal who spoke to me last night when I spoke at the community college. And Portugal has just passed legislation that the mother or the father can be paid for up to a year. The first 5 months at full pay, after that at some sliding scale, to be sure that you are able to balance family and work and you get your job back. But here's what they did differently. No family can get that money unless the husband as well as the wife take some of the time. So what they're saying is we recognize that not only many men want to be involved in raising their children, but we need in our societies to have women and men concentrate on the family side of life as well as the job side. So it's another example where we would expect, I think, most women here feel like they're getting some kind of a special benefit to get 12 weeks of unpaid leave. It's hard to get through the message that other countries are way ahead of the United States.
So what do we say to those business people that say that this would put them out of business? What's the logical argument for that?
Well, first of all, if people go away for the National Guard, businesses have had to keep the payroll job open. People have been able to come back. They have to make up the difference between what the National Guard sort of pay scale is and what the person was making, and nobody has blinked. Nobody has thought a business would go out of business, even though the National Guard has been making this incredible contribution in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War. So we know how to do it. This isn't a special issue for women. It is an issue for business to get all of the talent they need and be sure that they can keep that talent with their business. So we just have to look with a little wider lens on the issue. When we did, just one more sentence here, but when we did pass family and medical leave, it had passed in 30 states before the Congress did it. President Bush the first had vetoed it several times before it was actually signed into law by President Clinton. But what happened was many of the states did an analysis of what happened when they had had family and medical leave for several years. Was there any negative impact on business? And there was none. So we think about these things and we talk about them a lot, but it's not necessarily true. So the research out there is pretty strong.
So the idea is if an employee is taking care of the business and the business takes care of the employee by taking care of their family, then there's going to be greater commitment to loyalty and probably to quality of work.
Absolutely, and productivity. If you know that your family's well taken care of, then when you're on the job, you're not as divided about, oh, all the problems I've got. Did the babysitter come? What's going on? Babysitter's sick. The kids come home from school at 3 o'clock. So, I mean, in fact, it is a good investment. Companies, this is not just the small businesses, but the larger businesses, the research shows that employees are far more productive if there are flexible working hours, if the company invests in family-friendly policies, that workers, they say they're very loyal, but they're also more productive and morale is higher.
As I understand it, we're going to see a shift in the finances of our nation and who's controlling the purse strings, literally, and the greatest amount of income. What does this mean to our nation, do you think, that women will soon control 60% of the money in our country?
Well, I hope that some of the trends that are already out there are the ones that will expand. We have companies that are socially responsible companies. They worry about the environment and the community and diversity. And those companies, women are 70% of the investors in those companies. So I think women are saying we want a different model of what our economy should look like. So that's one really important trend. The second trend that I think out of this kind of change we're all happening with the terrible economic crisis that we have is if we don't think about doing business differently, we're really missing the boat. And women bring something different to the table. The business research is very, very clear that women bring different kind of management styles. They bring a different attention to things like a family-friendly workplace, that the companies are more profitable when there's at least 30% women on the board. So I think this is an incredible time for us to think, how do we want to run the country? And for women who are investors, who have some of those purse strings themselves, the question is, what do you want to see different and how can you use your leverage in what small way you can to make it change?